And I think just to complexify the problem a little bit more, I think I also came to you after the civil resistance conversation. I was like, oh, there's also collusion attacks where people will sell their legitimate identities, just to make it a little bit harder on top of the civil problem. Jeff, do you want to take a swing at this?
Yeah, definitely. Well, actually, I just wanted to, give some kudos and praise to the Gitcoin Passport, and I think there's a really interesting because what ended up coming out of all of this was sort of a composite of a bunch of different identity systems, and with the for anyone who doesn't know how that worked, it was essentially you could attest or prove your identity on Bright ID, IDENA network. There are a number of different identity networks, and you could get essentially a bonus multiplier on your donations based on how many platforms you were verified on. And I think this is a really interesting way that we can compose different Web3 primitives, because each of those identity networks probably, thought they were solving the problem all on their own. But what you find oftentimes is that they're sort of solving for one perspective on that, or one ecosystem. So I really like the Gitcoin product that ended up coming out of this is sort of a enmeshment of a bunch of different identity networks to create an even stronger civil identity or civil prevention mechanism, and then turn that around and offer that as a product to the larger Web3 ecosystem. I think that speaks beautifully of the composability and the power of these
And
protocols and
I
algorithms.
would say that identity is one of the hardest places to deal with composition, right? Because just think about some specific cases. I could use Bright ID on one hand and like Twitter and GitHub and a few other things on another hand to create two distinct identities that are each partially supported by by tools being used for identity. And in the process, you could get some degree of sibling, though I'll grant you it's bounded because you're limited by sort of the number of platforms that are respected within the system. But the thing about the passport that I think is important for people to understand is that there's a very big difference between a passport and, say, stamps in your passport or attestations within your passport. And so you're not actually alleviating the need for sort of trustworthy, and I'll call them institutions, even if those institutions are themselves, DAOs or, algorithms maintained by groups of people. Again, I'm going to use Bright ID as my favorite example. Sort of Bright ID is a thing that you could come to trust as Bright ID. And insofar as you trust it, then it would be meaningful for you to see that in your Gitcoin passport. And the same for any other attestation mechanism that has been integrated or composed into the passport system. So, in a way, creating a nice standardized API, so to speak, a place or data structure that you could go to look for those attestations and know how to read them, have a reasonable expectation about how to interpret them, is actually really critical as a sort of data source for people who are building any sort of protocol that requires a stronger notion of identity. But your particular decision about how that data will be used in your app is still in your own policy space as the dApp developer that's using something like the Gitcoin Passport.